Merger. If both properties come under one ownership, the easement no longer exists. Expiration of purpose. If an easement was granted for a specific purpose and the purpose no longer exists, the easement ends. For example, an easement granted for access to a construction site might end when the work is complete. Abandonment. An easement can end when it has been abandoned, but non-use is not necessarily abandonment. There must be a positive action that shows the holder of the easement no longer intends to use it. Prescription. A prescriptive easement is terminated when the holder of the servient estate openly and continuously prevent the easement holder from using it for the statutory period of time. Usually the same time period is required to create the easement. Necessity. An easement created by necessity will last only as long as the necessity lasts. For instance, if a landlocked owner acquires access to the property by buying the adjoining tract, the easement is no longer needed. A license grants personal permission to use the land of another without creating an estate for the user. It is not a right but a personal privilege and does not encumber the ownership of the land being used. It is usually a short-term privilege and is not transferable or inheritable. Unlike an easement, a license can be terminated by the landowner at any time and may be granted either orally or in writing. A license will automatically terminate upon the death of either party or on conveyance of the property. Typical examples of a license include permission to park in a public parking lot, permission to enter a public park, or permission to attend a football game. Private restrictions are limitations on the use of one's property in order to protect the right of others. An owner can specify how a property can or cannot be used, either through contractual covenant or through conditions in a deed. However, restrictions that violate public policy, such as restrictions that promote illegal discrimination, are unlawful. It is generally felt that any restrictions on an owner's right to sell or otherwise convey property are also unenforceable. Sometimes private restrictions conflict with zoning laws. For example, zoning might specify 50 feet setback and the private covenant specify 100 feet setback. In this case, the stricter requirement always prevails and the structure would have to be built 100 feet from the street. Covenants is a promise made in a sales contract, lease, or deed that specify the property will or will not be used in a certain manner. The purpose is to preserve property values by establishing standards with which each owner must comply. The declaration of restrictions that is recorded with the plate of a new subdivision provides a good example. Typical subdivision restrictions involve architectural approval, type of construction, style of architecture, number of structures on each lot, setback lines, square footage minimums, mobile home usage, building heights, sign usage, fences, antenna, and lawn maintenance. Subdivision restrictions usually have an effective time limit and detail outlining how the restrictions can be removed, altered, or extended. As a rule, any changes require unanimous agreement of all those having an interest in the property. Court action is required to enforce a restrictive covenant, either the grantor or other parties to the covenant must promptly seek an injunction to stop the prohibited use or must sue for damages. The court might not act if the agreed upon time limit for the restriction has expired or if the neighbors have obviously disregarded the restrictions. Loss can also occur because of undue delay in taking proper legal action. A principle of law called laches, whatever you pronounce it. This is based on the principle that if one has a right, it should be exercised. Waiting too long might cause loss of the right. Conditions are found in deeds. For example, the grantor might specify in a deed that the property is to be used only for a hospital or that it may not be used for a chicken farm. Conditions differ from covenant because they usually do not have any time limits but run with the land indefinitely unless removed by a court. A deed containing a condition might also specify that what is to happen if the condition is not being met. Unlike the covenant, this is not limited to an injunction or a suit for damages. It could result in the ownership reverting to the original grantor or provide a basis for that grantor's heirs to sue for possession. Encroachment arises when an improvement, building, or other attachment illegally extends beyond the boundaries of its owner's land onto adjoining land or onto adjoining airspace. Most encroachments are unintentional but can be an encumbrance on the property encroached upon. They do not show up in a title search, and although they may be observable, they are usually revealed by a professional survey. The fence or building that extends onto a neighbor's land is basically trespassing. A tree that overhangs the neighbor's yard is a nuisance. In either case, the building can seek court actions to either remove the encroachment or collect damages. Known encroachments should be acknowledged and accepted in a sales contract. Failure to have an encroachment removed could, in due time, result in a prescriptive easement. The best solution for most encroachments is for the two owners to agree to legalize the encroachment either by license or a formal easement agreement. This might involve payment for the easement.